Perfect thumbs up. All now write section 1 approximately equals 500 words minimum, as a smooth narration, no headings, no scenes, no fluff. This will set the stage for your faceless infidelity romantic story, keeping it direct, atmospheric, and aligned with the outline. In the year 1847, when Kentucky was still a land where rural fields stretched endlessly and silence hung heavy between small towns, there stood an inn on the outskirts of Millbrook. It was modest in appearance, built of timber and stone, yet it carried an allure that no passing traveler could resist. The inn was not just a stop along the road, it was a place where men sought comfort that went beyond food and lodging. The sisters who owned it, Margaret and Eliza Cunningham, were the reason Millbrook Inn became something more than a resting place. They were known across counties not only for their beauty but for the way they made a man feel seen, valued, and desired, even if only for a fleeting moment. For those who wandered through the doors, the inn seemed to hum with a warmth that ordinary establishments lacked, as though temptation itself was stitched into its walls. Travelers arrived weary, their boots caked in mud, their shoulders heavy with burdens carried from home. They entered seeking only a bed, yet often left with something more tangled and dangerous. Margaret's laughter had a way of melting the rigidness of the most disciplined soul, while Eliza's soft voice drew confessions from men who never dared to whisper them at home. Both sisters were skilled in offering a kind of affection that was neither fully promised nor fully denied, leaving men suspended between duty and desire. The small town whispered about them with sharp tongues. Mothers warned sons not to linger, and wives grew anxious when their husbands claimed to be traveling for work. Yet despite the whispers, the inn never fell empty. There was always someone arriving, someone hungry not just for bread and ale, but for closeness they could not admit to craving elsewhere. The reputation of Millbrook Inn grew in shadows, a tale passed quietly among men who carried secrets in their hearts. Some came back again and again, convinced they could balance the life they were bound to with the indulgence they found under the Cunningham sisters' roof. Others passed through once and never forgot the taste of warmth that had nothing to do with fire or food. What began as harmless conversation by the hearth often deepened into gestures, an extra touch when pouring a drink, a glance held too long in the glow of candlelight, a hand brushed against another in the stillness of night. It was enough to stir something forbidden, enough to make men forget what waited for them back home. Though the inn stood as a beacon of welcome, there was something darker beneath its charm, a quiet reminder that love taken in secrecy always left behind more than it gave. The people of Millbrook began to notice men who returned changed, their eyes restless, their families uneasy. And then there were those who never returned at all, their names spoken with unease, their last known stop the inn kept by the Cunningham sisters. By then, the ground near the property already held more than stones and grass, it carried the first whispers of graves, shallow markers of stories cut short, each one tied to passion that had crossed the line of what should never have been offered or taken. Understood. Thumbs up. Here's section 2, minimum 500 words, written as a smooth faceless narration, keeping it direct, no repetition, no scenes or headings, fully aligned with the infidelity theme and building naturally from section 1. Men who came to the inn often told themselves they were only stopping for a night, that the road demanded rest and nothing more. Yet once inside, they discovered a different kind of hunger stirring. Margaret had a way of drawing men into conversation that slipped past their guard, asking questions about their journeys, their wives, their lives, until they revealed more than they intended. Eliza, quieter but no less magnetic, carried an intimacy in her stillness, her gaze lingering long enough to unsettle a man who swore he had never strayed. Together, the sisters created an atmosphere where loneliness dissolved and loyalty blurred. Married men found themselves laughing like bachelors, their rings suddenly feeling like burdens instead of bonds. The preacher who stopped in one autumn evening became a story in whispers, for he had built his reputation on sermons about purity and discipline. Yet within days, he was seen returning to the inn, his voice softer each Sunday, his fire dimmed by the very temptations he condemned. Then there was the soldier, his body scarred from battles, who swore his heart belonged to the wife waiting for him back home. But Margaret's hand on his arm, her voice in the quiet of night, made him falter. He convinced himself it was harmless, a moment stolen and soon forgotten, but moments have a way of growing roots when shared in secret. He returned again and again, until his loyalty became a thread stretched too thin. Not all who visited the inn intended to betray, yet betrayal grew easily in its walls. It began with looks exchanged across a candlelit table, grew with late-night walks through the orchard behind the inn, and bloomed in rooms where silence protected their actions from the judgment of the world. Each man told himself he was different, that his secret could be managed, but secrets breed more hunger, and hunger does not stay satisfied. The sisters did not make promises, they offered only presents, yet it was enough to unravel even the most steadfast vows. Women in town began to sense it, though their husbands denied it. They noticed the shift in posture, the evasive answers, the way some men grew restless at home. Fights erupted behind closed doors, and suspicion settled like dust over marriages that once seemed steady. The Cunningham sisters became both admired and despised, admired by those who had tasted their company, despised by those left behind to live with the consequences. Still, men kept coming, each convinced he could handle the fire without being burned, each believing he was in control, though the truth was that desire had already chosen for him. What unfolded inside the inn was more than physical betrayal, it was an unraveling of trust, a surrender to forbidden connection that once accepted could not be undone. Here's Section 3, minimum 500 words, written as a seamless continuation. It builds into consequences and deepens the tension around secrecy, jealousy, and the beginnings of tragedy, with no repetition, no headings, and no fluff. The cost of what unfolded inside the inn did not remain hidden for long. Desire carried in secret always leaves traces, and soon Millbrook was weighed down by the heaviness of those traces. Husbands who once returned home steady and sure now carried guilt that changed their very manner. They grew short-tempered with wives who questioned them, evasive when asked about where they had been, and distant in the very places they once belonged. A wife who had always trusted her husband began to notice the smell of perfume that was not hers on his collar. Another saw the way her husband's eyes grew restless when the inn was mentioned in town gossip. The certainty of betrayal slowly spread, not in words but in the silence that passed between families now fractured by suspicion. Fights erupted in homes where once there was calm. Some men admitted nothing, others lashed out when confronted, and a few confessed but justified their actions as weakness or misunderstanding. Women began to speak quietly to one another, sharing suspicions and stories, and with every retelling the Cunningham sisters' names grew sharper, etched into the hearts of wives as enemies who had stolen not just their husband's attention but their peace. Yet no matter how much disdain spread, the inn remained alive with visitors, as though desire itself mocked the cries of those left behind. But infidelity rarely ends with secrecy alone. It calls jealousy like a shadow, and jealousy brings violence. A husband accused of betraying his wife challenged another man in town to a duel, certain he had been mocked for his weakness. The two men met with pistols at dawn, and one never returned. Another man, tormented by guilt and unable to reconcile his actions, was found drowned near the river, leaving behind a letter that hinted at sins he could not name. The more the sisters gave themselves to these fleeting romances, the more the ground around the inn seemed to drink from the sorrow it created. Whispers about missing men soon followed. Travelers who stopped at the inn were not always seen again, and families who came searching were met with shrugs or silence. Townsfolk began to avoid the woods near the property at night, claiming they had seen shapes moving, heard cries carried by the wind, or found disturbed soil where no one should have been digging. The number 43 became a curse in Millbrook, the count of graves hidden beneath grass and stone, each one tied to a story of passion that ended in ruin. The sisters were spoken of with fear as much as fascination. Some believed they had lured men to their deaths, others that the men destroyed themselves with jealousy and shame, their bodies claimed by the earth. No one could prove the truth, yet the graves stood as silent witnesses to the cost of desire when taken too far. Love stolen in secrecy had transformed into something darker, something that bound Millbrook in a tale of betrayal and death. And still, despite the shadows gathering around the inn, the doors remained open, the candles lit, the sisters welcoming the next soul who could not resist what waited inside. Check mark.